Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of Edina. I'm Sam Thompson and I'm proud to be your 66th president. We are coming to you entirely on Zoom today, and we have 65 people that have pre-registered on Zoom. When you're on Zoom, please mute your audio during the presentation, rename yourself in participants list as needed, use the chat for questions and comments, and if you're a guest, welcome, and please put your name into the chat room and who you're with. And this meeting is being recorded. I want to thank past President Josh Sprague for covering for me last week, and those of you that reached out with concerns. I was actually at the Mayo Clinic having surgery, and I'm happy to report it was a success, and I feel great. We have an excellent meeting scheduled today. Our speaker is political expert David Schultz from Hamline University, and he's going to talk about this past year's historical events, including the election. And we originally had scheduled David last October before the election. And then we had scheduling changes, so we decided to move David to after the inauguration. And we thought, you know, it's a month and a half from the election. There'll be some calmness. David will have time to sort things out and give us a nice recap. Well, my, have things changed. David will have so much to cover. As many of you know, Rotary is non-political. Rotary clubs do not take positions on political issues. Matter of fact, at the Rotary International 1916 convention, Samuel Botsford of Buffalo said, Rotary clubs have no business in politics. Politics is about personality rather than facts, and therefore should not be brought into clubs. Well, R.B. Campbell took an opposing view, and he said, I believe that politics should be brought into meetings. We are a business organization, and it is to our interest to see that the government of our city and state is run properly. Well, eventually it was decided that Rotary clubs should educate our members on political issues, and individual members then should do with that information as they saw fit. So 100 years later, that continues to be the place in Rotary clubs. Our club wants to continue to always maintain our non-political focus and not take positions on either side. Yet we do want to educate our members on the political landscape. Many clubs make money off of participants, such as dunk tanks at fundraisers and county fairs. This past year, many of us have been glued to the tube, watching all that's going on, including COVID, the protesting, the political activity. We just can't get enough news. There's so much going on that it affects our regular routines. And I'm the first to admit I'm watching way too much TV. Here's a shot of me watching TV in my man cave. So let's get the meeting started. We have a lot to cover, including David Schultz, who will educate us on what this political craziness is all about. And I'm looking forward to hearing his talk. Member update. I wanted to find out what some of our members have been doing this winter for fun during COVID. And Scott Blake sent me some great photos of his kids. You've got Vivian, who's the oldest daughter, who's 8 years old in the middle, and Ben, who's on the right, and he's 5 years old. And they are both obsessed with skating this winter. And all three of his kids are on the left, and Matt is the youngest. He'll be 3 on Valentine's Day. So Scott, thanks for sending these. You have some beautiful kids. And Bjorn and Hannele Freudenthal, they've been out downhill skiing this winter at Buck Hill, and here's a shot of them on January 10th. Rotary in the news. I'm happy to announce that we have some new appointments for our District 5950. 3 of them I want to tell you about. First off, Tim Murphy, who's in our club and is the current Zone 29 and Polio Coordinator. He has been reappointed for 3 years for the great work that he's done. In the middle, you've got Tom Gump, our district governor, and he's from the Edina Morning Club. And he's been appointed to serve as one of 8 assistant Rotary coordinators for Region 36, which is 23 districts and 52 Rotarians. He'll be supporting membership. And finally, with the Burnsville Breakfast Club is Carol McDonald. She's been appointed Assistant Regional Rotary Foundation Coordinator, the same region as Tom, and she will be supporting Foundation. We have some birthdays this next week. 7 of them, matter of fact. So happy birthday to all of you. And we have some Rotary anniversaries in our club. We have 4 of them. So congratulations to the 4 of you. A couple more things I just want to point out. I want to thank Joe Christensen for being our Zoom greeter today. He's doing a great job. And Ryan Wilson for AV support. And remember, next Thursday, we start live again. And we will continue the Zoom. We'll be hybrid. So you have both, either live at the Edina Country Club or Zoom. Remember, if you are going to do Zoom, we provide a $10 credit every time you pre-register. And you need to pre-register, so that's really important. So now, I would like to have Jim Ryman come on and do our invocation.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, everybody. As we reflect on the events of the past couple of weeks, and particularly yesterday's inauguration of a new president and administration, I want to share with you a prayer that I found on the internet. It's entitled, "A Prayer to Heal a Divided Nation." So please pray with me. Dear God, this new day has dawned with our country divided. Help us to remember that the experiment called democracy is not over. It's still being tested. After 240 years of existence, the final results are not yet in. We still have work to do. It stretches out before us across the wheat fields and deserts, from the mountains to the prairies, from sea to shining sea. In the midst of our sense of victory, help us remember your call to us to love one another as you love us. In the midst of our sense of defeat, help us to remember that you still reign. You alone are worshiped. You alone are God. Help us to put our energy into serving others, our families and friends and neighbors, here and around the world. Help us remember your high calling to us to be agents of forgiveness and reconciliation, love and peace, healing and hope in a world made dark by fear and hatred and brokenness. Help us to rebuild this nation by seeking out your image in the face of others, finding the best in us to serve those who are the least, the lost and the lonely. May we find strength in our diversity and seek the courage to live into what is written on our currency, "In God we trust." For only in you can we live in safety. Only in you will we find justice. And only in you will we know the peace that passes all human understanding. Amen. And now the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now our 4-way test of things we do and say. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jim. Okay, Bjorn, if you're there, could you introduce our guests?
A really warm Rotary welcome to our 4 guests today, who are Mesan Marcus Edor, a guest of Rob Bredding, and we have Julie Westbrook, guest of Jennifer Hendrickson, and we have Norberto Moran, who's a guest of Norberto Moran. So welcome everybody, including Gay Clapp. Thank you for being here, guys.
Great. Thanks, Bjorn, and welcome everybody. Next, I would like to introduce Maddie Sladek, and she's going to talk about the Rotary Scholarship Grant that she received from our district, actually, and we are the sponsors. So it's a grant provided by our district, and we're sponsoring. So Maddie, take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam. Yeah, so like Sam said, I applied for a Rotary Global Grant, and your Edina Rotary Club sponsored me. So thank you so much. A little bit about me. I graduated from the University of Minnesota this past spring, double majoring in marketing and entrepreneurial management. And I'm currently a sales associate for Cargill. So this whole presentation, I just want to say thank you for your club for sponsoring me, and a special thank out to Shelly, who was really helpful in helping me with my application. So what is the Rotary Global Grant? So it's a scholarship which can be used for 1 or more years of an abroad graduate degree program. So the application and the degree program must focus on one of Rotary's 6 areas of focus. So the one for my application that I focused on was economic and community development. So the overall process for the grant is establishing sponsorship with a Rotary district. So that would be your Club of Edina, and then establishing a relationship with an overseas host club, and then attaining the second half of the sponsorship from Rotary Global. And then how I will use the global grant, I'm, like I said, focusing on economic and community development. And the 2 programs I applied to is the Innovation and Business Development at the Copenhagen Business School in Denmark, and then also the Global Development Program at the University of Copenhagen. So I applied recently, and I'll hear back in March. But yeah, so I'm hopeful that I'll get accepted to those. And then the grant that you all are sponsoring me for would be applied to that school's tuition and costs for that. So that's so huge, and supporting me in that. And then both programs focus on analyzing and identifying strategies for lasting development in organizations. And a lot of alumni of these programs have gone on to have careers in developing countries and helping with nonprofits and organizations there. So overall, I really can't thank your club enough, and the members and you members of the club. And I really look forward to connecting in the future about my experience once I'm over there and can bring back stories. So thank you again.
Oh, great. Well, thanks, Maddie. You're going to be great.
Yeah.
And this scholarship doesn't happen all the time. I think it's been a while since we sponsored one. So way to go, Maddie. Yeah. Okay,
thank
Bonnie.
you, and thank you all.
You're welcome.
Hi, International. Maddie, nice to see you, because of course, almost everything international that happens in this club has something to do with this committee. So it's a very exciting and very different kind of committee for me. This is my first year, as you know. Thank you, Shelley, and all the members of the committee for helping me get oriented. So there are 4 or 5 kinds of things that this committee works on. One is Global Scholars, which you just saw Maddie is our Global Scholar. What that means is that we reviewed her application. Shelley helped tremendously with that, interviewing techniques, all of that. And she won a $30,000, she earned a $30,000 scholarship from the district. This is not your money. Okay, so that's different. Now I want to present some projects that are your money. Okay, so there are different kinds of projects that we do. One is supporting projects that other people are doing globally who happen to ask us for money. The Maple Grove Club has been very active this year in water projects in India, and we helped sponsor one of their global grants. And so you can see on the left side of your screen that those people walking and creating a dam for their water. And in the middle slide, you see the West Carver Rotary had a global grant for the Edina Hospital in Madagascar. And that is a picture of one of the units in that hospital. Their project is going to focus on water, solar, and electricity. So that's very exciting, and we are partnering with them as well. The Edina Morningside had a Cana Hospital in Kenya global grant, and that is on the center. You can see I put it on the slide on the right-hand side for you. We actually, as you probably know, in order for people to earn a global grant or any kind of a grant, actually, they have to have another Rotary Club at the other end of this grant, the boots on the ground people who are actually going to be involved in the grant. And so we're very excited to be able to share your financial support with these folks as well. Now, on the next slide, we talk about a completely different kind of grant that we've been involved with this year. These are big ticket items. Anytime Tim Murphy sends you an email, it's going to cost money. So get ready. He is an international networker and people know Tim. And so he has brought some very large grants to us that we have funded this year. One, or that we will be funding this year, we've approved. In order for a grant to get approved by our committee, it actually has to come through with a fair amount of paperwork. Our committee then meets, approves it. It then goes to the foundation at our club, and it's approved at that point. So our committee is the first step of approval. There is a project that's very interesting that is coming out of Canada, actually, with our new Rotary president, Jennifer Jones, coming in next year, I believe. It is a telebehavioral health program on mental health for teenagers. And this is an interesting grant. We have donated $10,000 to this grant, and it's part of a partnership with the Jack Nicklaus Foundation as well. And then there's an education and literacy grant, which we also vetted, committee voted on, went to the foundation. And this is an education program for 5th to 8th graders on how to program drones. And so we're working with a club in Serbia on this particular grant. Next slide, please. Then there's a couple other things we're involved with. Thank you. We just approved, we got a grant from a very generous, we got a contribution, excuse me, from a very generous donor for different kinds of exam beds for a hospital in the, for the pediatric unit in the Escuintla Hospital in Guatemala, where we're also going to be working on a water project next year. And so this is a pediatric exam bed that you're looking at here. And our request actually was just to provide some funding for the shipping, because the shipping got a little more expensive than anticipated. Anybody who's been involved with global grants realizes how important shipping is. So we approved that also, and the foundation approved it. So that's another place that we're spending money this year. The other aspect of this committee is going to be the global trip that is going to Guatemala. And that is, there are a lot of ifs or maybes about the details of that. Josh is involved with that particular project. And I don't have anything specific to report right now because we're watching the COVID situation and trying to be very responsible. So that's what International Grants has been doing. We've been working on a lot of different kinds of projects, and it's been a fascinating activity to be involved with. There are a lot of moving parts here.
Well, that's great, Bonnie. Thank you so much. And that trip that Josh is planning right now is tentatively looking at early to mid-May. So thanks so much. You're doing a great job, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Okay, next, Renee Harberts is going to talk about human trafficking.
Hi, thanks, Sam. Hi, everybody. So I asked Sam for just a couple minutes today to extend an invite to all of you and to share a story with you. And for those of you who know me, know that I love stories. So last week, I told you that January is designated as the National Slavery and Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And this January, the Rotary Club to End Human Trafficking is raising awareness to this issue by inviting all of you to attend two very special meetings of theirs with two special speakers. For those of you who don't know, the Rotary Club to End Human Trafficking was created right here in our own district to bring awareness to the issues of slavery and human trafficking, and to bring the networking power of Rotary to end this travesty. So one of the meetings was already passed. It was last week, and I'm happy to say that we had a number of members from our club listen in. But there is this one coming up again on January 28th. Matt Friedman will be the speaker. And from what I've been told, from what I understand, he will be a fantastic presenter. He is an international speaker who last year alone gave over 150 presentations on the topic of human trafficking. He has worked with the United Nations as an advisor, and he is the CEO of the Mekong Club. which is an organization that is mobilizing the private sector to engage in the fight against modern slavery. And that brings me to my favorite part, my story. So last week when we were at the meeting, they were talking about businesses and Rotarians and how they've been involved with this issue. And they told the story of Ed Bastian, who is the CEO of Delta, who is also is a Rotarian with the Rotary Club of Atlanta. And he has started a program that provides training to flight attendants and personnel to become aware of the telltale signs of human trafficking. And so they talked of a story that a young boy was on a plane, passed a note to a flight attendant, who then somehow during the flight got this, the note said, "This man is not my uncle. I've been taken." So the flight attendant got the note, somehow during the flight, got the boy away from this man. When the plane landed, officials greeted the plane, the man was arrested, and the young boy was reunited with his family. So I love that story, you guys, because it talks to me of the power of Rotarians as business people and what we're doing and how we're engaging. So it's the best of all things. Information on how to register for the Barker or for the meeting is in the Barker. And Becky will also be sending out an email either today or tomorrow with a link for registration. And you could also reach out to Ann Platt or myself if you have any questions. So thanks, hope some of you can attend. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Renee, a very moving story. Thanks so much. Okay, now I'd like to introduce Don Hutchinson, who will be introducing our program today. Don joined our Rotary Club about 7 years ago. Lisa Walker and Don co-chaired the Rotary Gala fundraiser in 2016, and this year Don is chairing the Speakers Committee and doing a great job. And he also serves on the Race and Equity Committee. Don also serves as chair of the board for the Edina Chamber of Commerce. He and his wife, Dr. Nancy Hutchinson, have been happily married for 48 years, and they have 3 adult daughters. They are expecting their first grandchild in about 3 weeks. Congratulations. Some of you may recall Nancy spoke to our club in August of 2018. Don is the only member of his family who did not graduate from Edina High School. Overcoming this disadvantage, Don did make it into college, and he received a BA degree in economics from Wake Forest University. And he even got into graduate school to earn an MBA degree from the University of St. Thomas. His classification is financial planning. So take it away, Don.
In November 2015, Professor David Schultz was asked who the 2016 presidential nominees would be. There were many names in the mix. His answer, Clinton and Trump. And then in the spring of 2016, he predicted a Trump victory, but with the popular vote going to Hillary. He nailed that one too. So perhaps he can read the stars. David Schultz is a professor of political science who teaches across a wide range of American politics. He's also a professor in the Hamlin and the University of Minnesota Schools of Law, where he teaches election law. David's the author of 30 books and more than 100 articles on American politics, election law, and the media and politics, and he is regularly interviewed and quoted on these subjects by the likes of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Economist, National Public Radio, and so forth. He is a 3-time Fulbright scholar who has taught extensively in Europe. He is very smart. By the way, David's going to be taking questions at the end of his talk, and I'm sure that you're going to have a bunch of questions. As he is speaking today, please be sure to type your questions into the chat function below. So one other thing, David is also an amateur astronomer, so he can see the stars, and perhaps he can also read the stars. That said, it's not clear to me he was able to foretell everything that happened leading up to November 3. and not to mention all the events that transpired since then, culminating in yesterday's peaceful transfer of power to President Joe Biden. But let's let him tell it. Please give a warm and enthusiastic, nonpartisan Rotary welcome to Professor David Schultz.
Great. Thank you very much for a very warm and very generous introduction. What I'd like to do today, in the small amount of time that I have, because it really is very brief here, is maybe say a few things, of course, about the 2020 election, but mostly where I want us to go is, given the fact that we have a new administration in place and we're all wondering what's going to happen, what's going to happen over the next week, 100 days, whatever like that. Let's kind of look a little bit forward also in terms of thinking about what some of the range of possibilities are. And for many of you, whether you're in business yourself or advising clients, maybe having some idea about where American politics and where the Biden administration may be headed, I think would also probably be just useful information for all of us to be able to think about here. Well, in terms of the way I would describe what happened in the 2020 election, I would give at least two different statements in terms of it. One of them is to say that unfortunately, we entered the 2020 election cycle as an incredibly divided country, and we exited the 2020 election cycle also incredibly divided. The speech yesterday that Joe Biden gave is the first step of trying to address some of that division, and we'll see how successful he can be. But just to give you a picture of how divided we really were coming out of the election, or actually even going into the election, a few things are worth pointing out. Is the fact at the end of the day that we have the most narrow congressional majority probably in nearly 100 years, if not longer. The Democrats lost seats in the House. They have a very small majority there. They have a 50-50 majority in the Senate. And I say 50-50 majority because many of you know that the vice president now gets to break ties. As I was kidding with somebody and saying that since she was a U.S. senator and now she's a vice president, she probably should keep her office in the U.S. Senate because she's going to be probably casting a lot of votes to break ties for a while. Even though on one level also the Biden administration, or Joe Biden, the candidate, won by 7 million popular votes, we know that the popular vote really doesn't determine the presidential election. And if we get down to the Electoral College, much in the same way that 4 years ago, shift 85,000 votes in 3 states and Secretary Clinton would have been president. In this election, roughly the same thing. Shift around 85 to 90,000 votes across 4 states, and Donald Trump would have won a second Electoral College victory. At the state legislative levels across the country, we have Republicans picked up a net gain of about 145 Electoral College seats, picked up a couple of chambers. So they have a little bit of an advantage there. And Minnesota, just to bring it close to home, remains the exception to the rule across the rest of the country. And what I mean by that, going into the election, we were the only state in the country where the legislature was divided. That is, one chamber was controlled by one party, one by another. We remain the only state in the country with a divided legislature along that lines here. We also know, going in and exiting the election, that we live in basically 2 different countries. And what I mean by that, Republicans and Democrats don't just watch different news services. We shop at different stores. We drive different cars. We wear different clothing oftentimes, or at least shop at different places. Many people have heard me talk for the last couple of years, have heard me point out that 4 years ago, show me a map where Democrats did well and show me a map where Republicans did well, and overlay that with a map of the location of Whole Foods grocery stores, Chick-fil-A restaurants, and Cracker Barrel restaurants, and we'd have a nearly perfect prediction of how that area voted. All of this simply saying about how divided, and coming out of the election, how divided we are. Without sort of getting into sort of the nitty-gritties of it, divisions over, was it a fair, free and fair election? divisions over whether or not there was voter fraud, divisions over what the reality or not of the pandemic, of whether face masks work, of whether the economy was the fault of Donald Trump or he gets credit for it. All I want to establish is the fact that leading up through the election, we just saw this incredible division in American politics that perhaps unfortunately culminated in what happened on January 6th, perhaps, right? So that's my first point in terms of retrospectively looking back at what happened. The second thing is going to surprise everybody, is that my argument is going to be that the 2020 elections fell along the way that was entirely predictable. And you're going to say to me, what do you mean entirely predictable? About a year ago, in December of 2019, I was starting to put together an outline for the new edition of my presidential swing states book. It's an edited volume, which means I need to solicit authors who can write on particular chapters of the books. I don't claim to be an expert, for example, on, let us say, New Hampshire politics, et cetera, et cetera. So in putting it together, December of 2019, I made a couple of assumptions. Assumption one would be that it would be Donald Trump and Mike Pence again, of course, who would get the Republican nomination. And then I also said back then, it's more likely than not that it would be Joe Biden in terms of the presidential pick. And then I think the easiest prediction I've ever made in my life, I said it will be Senator Harris, well, now Vice President, of course, Harris. So I was basically saying that the election would be what it turned out to be between those four individuals. And the premise of my swing states book is that, remember, we elect presidents not on straight popular vote. We elect presidents based on the Electoral College, which means it's a 50-state election plus District of Columbia. And in 48 of those 50 states, the Electoral College is set up in winner take all. Given all of that, we know that there are some states that have way more Republicans than some, way more Democrats than some. And what I was arguing last December 2019 was that the presidential race was effectively over in 43 states. We knew how many electoral votes Biden was going to have, how many Trump was going to have. There was going to be 7 states totaling 111 electoral votes that would decide the election. Those states were what? Arizona, Florida. They were going to also be Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. If I got my numbers right, I think that got us to the 7 that we wanted there. There basically would be about 7 states that would decide the election. Hedging my bets a little bit, I thought, well, there's a possibility, however remote, that maybe Georgia would be in play. I didn't seriously think it would be in play until 2024, but I said maybe yes, so I ought to solicit an author for that. And essentially, that was my argument about what, 13 months ago. It would come down to those 7 or 8 states. Again, still didn't think it was going to be Georgia. So I thought, what, it was going to be 7 states. I thought that what the election would be all about, and I'll type it into here because some of you have heard me before about it. I thought the entire election would be, just a second here. Would essentially be 10, 11, 7, 270. 10% of the voters located in 11 counties strewn across 7 states would determine who gets to 270 electoral votes. And you know what happened? Largely, that's what happened, is that those 7 states were the 7 states that dominated the election cycle, especially the general election cycle, until early October. Early October, then, it shifted, as could be predicted, to Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the 3 states that determined the election 4 years ago. And then in the closing week, it turned into what? Pennsylvania. All of this entirely predictable. Now, this speaks to what? How polarized we are. It speaks to so many different issues about American politics. But it really did come down to that path there, those few number of states that were going to decide the election. And what makes this so surprising is Bonnie and Renee, I know, are thinking this. They're thinking, hey, Schultz, when you made this prediction about 12 or 13 months ago, this was before the pandemic, the economic collapse. This was before George Floyd. Didn't those make a difference? Yeah, a little bit. But it speaks to how polarized we are. How polarized we were in terms of how we viewed those three incidences were reflective of our polarization. How we viewed those instances spoke to the rigidity of our views at this point in terms of how, at the end of the day, they largely did not affect the overall outcome or really trajectory of the campaign. And so I just find it interesting that, and I think some of you should too, is that even though there were some short-term blips in the process, this was going to be an election always about one thing and one thing only. It was going to be a referendum on the incumbent. And when an incumbent runs for a second term, it's always a referendum on that person. So this was always going to be election about Donald Trump and what you thought of him. And again, largely the numbers panned it out. The other day, I was working on my chapter on Minnesota for my swing states volume, and looking at the exit polling data. That is the polls that people answer as they leave for voting. It was clear that a far greater percentage of Democrats indicated that they were voting against their opponent than they were voting for Joe Biden. Again, reinforcing the notion that this was really just a referendum on Trump at the end of the day. So my point really is that my two major ones, and I want to transition to Biden in a second here. My major points are, one, the polarization, the division, the sense in which how we came out of the election very divided, and in the process to think about how, because of that division, everything was entirely predictable. All right. Having said that, we know that Joe Biden inherited the presidency yesterday, faced with really a bevy of challenges that we've not seen since probably Roosevelt in 1932, 1933. And we all know they are. We've got the pandemic, we've got the economic issues, we've got the status of the U.S. and the world economy, a lot of challenges facing us. And so what I want to spend just a few minutes on here is really talking about the question of, well, what can Joe Biden do? All right. Now, for those of you who like to read, I want to recommend to you two wonderful books. Okay. I think arguably these are the two single best books ever written on the presidency. And just about every, let's say, scholar would concur with that. Richard Neustadt wrote a book called Presidential Power. He wrote it back in the 1950s, and it's a wonderful book which opens up with a story. It's a story of the presidential transition from 1952 to 53, when Truman is leaving office and Eisenhower is taking over. And they asked Truman, do you have any advice for Eisenhower? And remember, by the way, for those of you who know, Eisenhower was a 5-star general. He was the head of Allied command, during D-Day. So, pretty good credentialed person. And Truman thought hard and said, my advice to Eisenhower, he said, poor Ike. He'll start issuing orders the first day and nobody will listen. He'll think it's like the army and it'll be very frustrating. He won't get anything done. And what Truman was saying, and this was the basis of Neustadt's book, is that presidential power is the power to what? The power to persuade. That at the end of the day, and some of you know this, of course, in your own work, that you can't bark and order people around. You've got to, you persuade people, you convince them, you get them to go along with you. And so Richard Neustadt's book about presidential character is wonderful. The other book, which I recommend, and it's a short, quick book to read, by the way, and it has applications beyond the presidency, is James McGregor Burns wrote a wonderful book called Leadership. Now, it's overwhelming. It's about 800 pages long, but it's the single best book ever written on leadership. And for those of you who have ever gone to a leadership training class where they talk about what transformational versus transactional leadership, if you ever heard those concepts before, James McGregor Burns is the one who really came up with those concepts. And so they're both truly wonderful books to look at about leadership and power. And the reason why I mention them is that in trying to assess what Biden can get done and what Biden's possibilities are, let's think a little bit about what's the political capital or the power that Joe Biden brings to office at this point. And of course, on the one hand, what he brings is what? Himself. Every president brings themselves, their aptitudes, their inclinations, their beliefs. Joe Biden is in many ways the antithesis of Donald Trump. And what I mean by that, for good or for bad, Donald Trump cast himself and was elected as the ultimate outsider, the ultimate non-politician coming in. Joe Biden has what? 38 years in the US Senate, 8 years as vice president, probably about as what? Seasoned in Washington politics as you possibly can be at this point. And so part of what he brings is this sense of understanding the institution and personalities. I was going to say, somebody asked a question, haven't presidential elections always been about personalities, not policies or outcomes? It's true, it is. You're absolutely correct. And that's what I'm getting at here. If I were to list my third book, by the way, if you want a third really outstanding book on the presidency, it's James David Barber's book, Presidential Character. And it's basically about the psychological, it was one of the first psychobiographies of presidents and how to predict how presidents act by understanding their upbringing. When I was in college back in the Stone Age, it was an absolutely brilliant book, and I still think it is. But yes, it is about psychology, and that's also the part that I'll get to this questions about the Electoral College and that in a little bit here too. But the point I'm getting at here, that Neustadt, that McGregor Burns, that Barber all make, is think about the person first. Again, Joe Biden, in terms of the skill sets that he brings, he also is what? A moderate by nature. He is, despite what anybody thinks, his record in Congress and Senate was always as what? An effort for good or for bad, I think for good, to try to work across the aisles. And he's not a radical. He's not going to try to have the revolution to change the world. He's a big believer in what? Small steps. And so that's first thing to think about here. The second thing to think about is that part of a president's political capital or ability to get things done is what? The majorities that they have in Congress. And as I mentioned to you, Biden does have majorities, razor thin at this point, trying to hold together a very diverse coalition within the House and the Senate, especially in the House, that ranges anywhere from, let's say, AOC and Ilhan Omar, to much more conservative people. So how he can hold together his majorities will be critical. Additionally, he benefits, I guess, from a Republican Party that's at war with itself right now. It's trying to decide where it wants to be in a post-Donald Trump world, or doesn't want to be in a post-Donald Trump world. And then we should also think about the fact that even with those majorities, even with those slim margins that he has, the Senate still has the filibuster rule. At the end of the day, that a single senator can still hold up legislation in the Senate unless you get 60 votes. Now, it's going to be hard to get that because you would have to get all 50 Democrats plus at least 10 Republicans, although there are some indications that the Mitt Romneys, the Susan Collinses, the Lisa Murkowskis of the world might be open to some negotiation, might be open to some persuasion. But nonetheless, that's going to be a challenge for the Biden administration. And again, reinforcing the notion that this is going to probably be an incremental administration. And what I mean by incremental, it's going to be the small baby steps to get things done. Well, how can the president get things done? Well, 3 different ways. We saw the first example yesterday and into this morning, executive orders. Presidents have a certain amount of authority, either inherent under the presidency or delegated to them to be able to issue executive orders. I think it's been at least 24. I think I might have seen almost 36 executive orders that Joe Biden issued in barely a 24-hour period, with the aim of reversing many of the policies of the Trump administration. So in case you folks don't know, we are back in what? We're back in the World Health Organization. We're back in the Paris Accords. Just before we went on, I saw that he's making a pitch, which I think is good, for us to stay in the nuclear arms treaty with Russia, which I think is always pretty nice, so we can limit how many bombs we have to blow each other up. And he wants to try to what? Keep us in the Iran nuclear deal. So we've seen presidents can act that way. Second, with a majority in the Senate, he should be able to get through almost all his appointments, not just the ones today, but coming down the line for what? Securities and Exchange Commission, for the Federal Communications Commission, his appointees to the federal bench, the courts, he should be able to get through at least for a couple of years. And so that's important. And then of course, there is what? The legislation. And as I mentioned to you, most legislation is going to require, well, let me put it this way. We don't know if he's going to need to have to worry about getting to 60 for most of his legislation. There may be a lot of things that there is agreement on, but if he does face a filibuster, we shall see. But there are some ways of getting around the filibuster. For example, you can't filibuster appointments, and things like budgetary and tax issues can't be filibustered either, which gives him some wiggle room to do things. Going into this election, or rather into his administration, he made clear that he wanted to get the pandemic under control. You heard him yesterday issue the mask mandates for interstate travel, for airlines flights, for all federal property. He's also said that he wants to move in terms of addressing the economy, and therefore the proposal for a 1.9 trillion, not billion, folks, trillion dollar stimulus bill that would provide aid not just to individuals, but to also local governments, schools, universities, et cetera, et cetera. He also has already introduced immigration legislation and wants to be able to address that as an issue. And then he's made two other major issues, climate change and improving America's race relations, and addressing the racial disparities is high on his priority list. And I just mention all of this because these become part of his agenda that, again, he can do some with executive order, some he can do with appointments, some he can do with legislation. We're going to see him using a combination of all of those, and assessing his success. We're going to start to see this in the next few days. Is he able to, for example, get support on immigration? He's talked about a major also infrastructure bill, as everybody keeps talking about for the last 20 years. Can he get any movement on that? And so this is where I want us to set us up. He is taking it at a time where the level of problems is unprecedented in the last, almost 90 years, and facing this incredible polarization. And saying the right words will help, but a lot of the polarization is driven by underlying economic and social anxieties, and how well he does in addressing those will be critical also. All right, so let me go through here. Are there questions here? Are there any moderates within the Democratic Republican Party to create a strong third party? I always like to describe the two major parties as Coke and Pepsi. And the reason why I mention that is that Coke and Pepsi have a strong incentive not to let Schultz's Cola on the shelf. It's very hard to, and you know what I'm referring to there. The rules are written to favor the two major parties. The two major parties write the rules. The entry barriers for a third party emerging are going to be difficult. Instead, what I actually see happening is the prospects of of the Democratic Party becoming a new centrist party. That yes, we can talk about the liberals and the left of the Democratic Party, but the center of the Democratic Party now is surrounding where? College-educated suburban women. That's what drove the election. And those are going to be the people, excuse me for a second. who are the new center. So I think we're going to see that happen. We're going to see perhaps the Mitt Romneys, the Susan Collinses, the Lisa Murkowskis gravitate in that direction. Okay, let's see. Question for Doug Johnson. Right or wrong, significant people are still convinced there's election fraud. If you're designing a voting process that will eliminate fraud and consistent throughout the country, what would it look like? I would probably have Congress could step in and pass nationally uniform election laws for federal elections. I would have the same rules for every state in the country, and which means same type of ballot design, same types of way of voting, address the issues of IDs, et cetera, like that. I think having that uniformity would be really very, very important here. I want to go back. Someone asked a question before I go forward here about, let's see, I thought there was an electoral college question there.
And David, if you could make it one more question, that would be great.
Okay, one more instead. How much does the media and the press contribute to the polarization we are seeing? An incredible amount. The way I describe it, we live in an incredibly fragmented media market now, and that fragmented media market means that I can cater to different interests and different people, that I can cast my news to the audience that I want. On top of which the social media is reinforcing that and creating the bubbles and echo chambers that we have. So yes, it's a whole different discussion. I'd be happy to come back and give some point, is to look at how the American media has changed from the era of the Walter Cronkite era to the fragmented we have now. And if I could do one more, what chances would you give Trump for being the nominated in 2024? What chances would you give for him running again as an independent? Almost zero for 2024, and as an independent, relatively low also. All right, so I think I'm getting the hook.
Thanks so much, David. Patty, if you can come on and thank our speaker, please.
Sure. David, thank you for joining us today and sharing your insight on how you predicted the election and helping us kind of understand the issues that Biden is facing as he moves forward, and kind of telling us about how divided we are as a country, and maybe us Rotarians can be the ones to help make that change. On behalf of our Rotary Club, from literacy and peace to water and health, Rotary is a global network of 1.2 million problem solvers who unite to take action to create lasting change to better our world. In honor of your presentation, we will make a donation to Every Meal, formerly known as the Sheridan Story, which is an organization focused on providing weekend and other food gap programs to over 10,000 children in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. So thanks again for being with us today, David.
My pleasure. Thank you for the wonderful donation to a very good group.
Great. Thanks so much, David.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye. Next week's speaker will be Eric Thorwanger. He'll be speaking about the cure for social distancing. And looking ahead, as mentioned, our live meeting will start up again next Thursday, the 28th at the Edina Country Club. February 3rd is Vocational Happy Hour, and February 16th is our Leadership Series. I want to thank all of you for being on the meeting today, and thank our guests for joining us, and thank David. And I want to leave you with a quote. The American spirit wears no political label. In service to others, and yes, in sacrifice for our country. There are no Democrats and no Republicans. There are only Americans. John F. Kerry. With that, meeting adjourned, and have a great weekend. Thank you.